Welcome back, everybody. Delighted to have another edition of the HKHDC webinars. My name is Roland Vogt. I'm the chairman of the Hong Kong Holocaust Tolerance Center. And we will follow in our series with investigating new angles and dimensions of the Holocaust. And today it's a great pleasure to have with us a survivor of the genocide against the Sinti and Romani people that occurred during the Holocaust, Mrs. Rita Prigmore. Mrs. Rita Prigmore will talk about her experiences and her story and share her testimony with us. And she is joining us from her home in Würzburg in Germany. So I'm absolutely delighted, Ms. Prigmore, to have you with us. And we're all very keen to hear your story.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation on this subject, because it is very important. It should never be forgotten, the genocide, because sometimes we are really close for it to happen again. So it is important that it is talked about and put out there in the world, because it was one of the worst genocide ever on Sinti and Roma. So thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome.
I will start. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, my name is Rita Prigmore. I am a Sinti, a Gypsy from a German city called Würzburg in Bavaria. My family is a family of musicians. My father, Gabriel Reinhardt, played the violin and was very successful throughout Germany with his Hungarian Gypsy band. My mother was a great singer and dancer in the CC Teatro of Würzburg. This theater was one of the leading cabarets and operette stages of the German Reich. My grandfather and his two brothers were basket makers. They were part of the Basket Makers Guild, and they had a very good profession. Baskets were needed in Würzburg for the wine growers. My grandfather and his family lived in Lohr, a town near Würzburg. They lived on a large piece of land with willows that they needed for their basket makers from. The members of my family were bilingual. Within our family, we practice the language of Romanes, but we also spoke German. Many Sintis in Germany had been living in Germany for hundreds of years and were very well integrated. Most of them had good professions or had fought as soldiers in the First World War. Others traveled around and sold their merchandise that they had produced. The year 1933, when Hitler came to power, was the beginning of the gradual exclusion of both the Jews and us Gypsies. My mother told me that everyone thought that Hitler was only persecuting the Jews. The Jews were more active in politics. There were Jewish mayors and writers. We Gypsies did not get involved in politics at all. The Jews were marked by the Jewish faith because they were of Jewish faith. We thought, but we were Christians, Catholics. Many of us were married to non-Sintis. In 1938, the Gestapo came to my grandfather's family. The land and the house were taken, and my family was told to leave. Then they were brought to a small apartment in Würzburg. The family consisted of my grandfather, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my mother, and my uncle, which meant 5 people had to share a 1.5 room. From that moment onward, they were no longer allowed to leave the city of Würzburg. In 1942, when almost all the German Jews had already been deported and murdered, the eventual fate of the German Gypsies was not clear yet. But the Sinti and Roma were confronted with many forms of persecution. They lost their German citizenship. Many of them were deported into camps and had to do forced labor. Children were no longer allowed to attend schools. There were no jobs, special registration requirements, and numerous of restrictions in daily life. The Nazi wanted to prevent the Sinti and Roma from procreating, so they planned the sterilization of all Sintis in Germany. Whoever was not willing to be sterilized was taken to Auschwitz. That was the alternative, which meant death. In 1942, my mother was picked up by two policemen and was taken to the office of Christian Blüm, the then responsible in Würzburg for so-called Gypsy questions. There my mother was faced with a decision: forced sterilization or concentration camp. But before the fixed date of the sterilization, my mother became pregnant. She had to report this to the Gestapo. Christian Blüm decided to stop the pregnancy. My mother was sent to the University Women's Clinic for examination. There they found out that she was pregnant with twins. My mother was then given permission to give them birth. Already during her pregnancy, my mother was examined by Werner Heide. He was the director of the mental hospital at the University of Würzburg. From summer 1940 until December 41, he was responsible for the planning and execution of the so-called Action T4. Hitler had decided to kill the disabled and mental ill. Heide sent about 100,000 people with his signature to death. Werner Heide also practiced genetic research in concentration camps from 1936 onward. Heide was well known with Josef Mengele, as you might know. Dr. Mengele was the ruthless twin researcher and later camp doctor of the Gypsy family camp. In Auschwitz, Mengele experiments were also carried out by Werner Heide in Würzburg. On March 3rd, 1943, my sister Rolanda and I were born. We were very thin and weak, but against the doctor's advice, my mother took us home. 5 days after our birth, she heard of many Sinti families who had been deported, that she could not imagine exactly what to expect, but she wanted to stay with her family and try to overcome the unknown threat together. And so my mother fled with us both to her family. After 4 weeks, the Gestapo came and brought us newborn twins to examination into the university clinic, allegedly because of malnutrition. My mother got no permission to see us. After 2 weeks, she could not stand it anymore and went to the hospital. After my mother had been asking several times, one of the nurses showed her only one child, me. My mother asked, "Where is my other child?" The nurse led her to a bathroom where my sister Rolanda was laying in a bathtub with only a shirt on her little body and a bandage around her head. She was dead. My mama panicked and ran out of the room into the children's department, and she took me out of my bed. I had a big bandage around my head. My mother ran out of the hospital with me. She went to the St. Rita's chapel. There she had me baptized under emergency condition in the name of Rita for Santa Rita. She went home. There the SS were already waiting for her. They left me with my mother for 2 days. Then they took me again. For a year, my mother did not know where I was. After this year, she received a letter from the Red Cross that she could pick me up. That was in the year 1944. For a long time, I did not know that I had a sister. I did not know what happened to us. My mother did not tell me because she did not want to burden me. I was a very sickly child. I often fainted. I went to school, but I was very weak. And so I was freed from the obligation to go to school because of a physical health default. To this day, I suffer from consequences of fainting, attacks, dizziness, and headaches. Dr. Heide had performed experiments on me and my sister to do research on how to change the color of our eyes. This is why we got injections in our heads and behind our eyes. I have a scar behind my right eye. After war, Dr. Heide was taken to prison and was meant to be convicted at the Nuremberg trials. On the way there, he managed to flee. He then worked undisturbed as a doctor for 10 years until he was discovered and eventually hanged himself in prison. In my family, many people died during the Second World War in concentration camps like Auschwitz. Those who had not been deported were also sterilized, like my grandfather, my uncle, and also my mama after our birth. Now I want to talk about a cousin of my mama, Anneliese Winterstein. Her fate is a testimony for all those who died in Auschwitz. Anneliese was to be deported to Auschwitz with her children, but her 5-month-old son, Waldemar, lay with lung infection in Würzburg University Clinic. A similar case. These circumstances kept the family from deportation. But the head of the Gypsy department, Christian Blum, instructed a nurse to bring the boy out of the clinic and even provided her with a police car for the purpose. Anneliese, little Waldemar, and her 4-year-old son Karl Heinz were deported to Auschwitz on March 16, 1944. Waldemar did not survive the transport. Karl Heinz died after a short time in Auschwitz. But Anneliese, a beautiful young woman, just 20 years old, had to deal with another catastrophe. The SS determined her for the prostitution camp Bordel. On June 12, 1944, out of shame and despair, Anneliese threw herself into the barbed wire fence which surrounded the camp and was loaded with high voltage. Anneliese is one of the approximately 500,000 Sinti or Roma who were humiliated, tortured, and became victims of the Holocaust between 1933 and 1945. We remember every one of them who lost their lives and the personal happiness unearthed by racism and terror of the Nazis. After 1945, the fight began for compensation. It was hard for the victims to talk about the suffering. Unusual, nobody talks about of what happened during the war. But now we had to talk about all the horrible things and to prove them. The government at the time showed little willingness to make adequate compensation. The prejudice against Gypsies had not disappeared. Compensation was often rejected on the reason that Sinti and Roma were not persecuted for racist reason, but because of their alleged criminal and antisocial behavior. For my mother and me, it was a tough fight for compensation. In the 80s, my family and I lived in America, but I decided to come back and fight for compensation. On the side of my mother, all through, that meant for me to be separated from my 2 children for a long time. It was a hard time, and we were always afraid that the horrors of the past could be repeated. because mainly of the responsibility for the Holocaust were never persecuted. Christian Blum, for example, the leader of the Department of Gypsy Questions in Würzburg. After the war, he worked in a high position in the police department of Würzburg. In spite of all these experiments, I feel no bitterness. Instead, I feel strong responsibility and a wish. I want to make sure that something like that never happens again. Thanks to the Christian community of Sant'Egidio, which I worked for peace on many different fields, I am now part of an international peace mission. I have been telling my story to thousands of people in all over the world. The fate of my people is touching them. Many are crying, many are asking me, what gives you the strength to speak about all that and not to be full of hate? When I first was in Auschwitz with the community 10 years ago, I told my story to more than 400 young people from all over Europe. That was not easy for me. Many of my family have been murdered in Auschwitz. To read all their names there on the blackboard and to see their pictures shook me very much. But it also changed something else in me. The unbelievable suffering I had seen there made me understand that hatred does not overcome suffering, but forgiveness. Forgiveness is a great force. I believe that only forgiveness builds the future, and hatred must be a thing of the past. The future can only be built up for understanding for each other. And this is something you have to do actively. You have to be interested in the other, to meet him, to speak to him, and to try to understand him. I would like to tell you that you could not build up anything with hatred. Hate and war are leading to nothing but new hate and destruction, division and new suffering. I have forgiven, but I will never forget. It shakes me deeply in my heart when I see right-wing groups and movements growing up in many Europe countries. Today, Gypsies are abused with the same words as under the Nazis, or they are told Hitler forgot to send you to the gas. Gypsy children in school are accused of stealing or regarded as dumb, and often they are sent up in special schools for public with health disabilities. I would like to say we live in difficult times. The coronavirus forced us to practice social distance. Hard times for me without meeting friends, with hugging my loved ones, but a disaster for many of my people, especially in Eastern Europe. They are seriously badly treated. In the concerning countries, the health status of many Romas are already significantly worse than in major population. Due to the anti-Ziganismus and exclusion, the life is poverty in human conditions, without access to clean water, enough food, hygiene articles, medical care. There is an increased risk of spreading the virus. Schools are closed. Many parents are unable to teach their children. For many, participation in online educations are missing. Like everyone else, Roma face the inhuman consequences of the crisis. People like to depress that domestic violence are growing, considering the bad condition and the lack of financial resource. In Romania, a list of corona-infected people was published online. Only traditional Roma names were written on it. Fake news like the increase racism and violence against Roma. It shakes me deeply in my heart that the suffering of my people is going on and on. But my dear friends, I'm not pessimistic because I know that together we can change the world so that it becomes more human. Let us build a society in Europe and in the world in which Sinti and Roma and all other minorities are no longer discriminated against. Let us not be silent when we become witness of injustice. Let us raise our voice against the indifference. Peace begins in each of us. Let us not hate those who are foreign to us, but talk to each other. Overcome the prejudice, because I have seen with my own eyes that every prejudice can end in a disaster like Auschwitz. Pope Francis prays for the peace with the world. Nobody saves himself alone. This is so true. Wars at the democratic governments are corona, pandemic, and the climate changes are teaching us that only together and united we can build a better future for us. Please be united and forgive each other like God forgives us. There is no other great source of power in my life that is prayer. God never left me. I know that that is my support. God is always near those who are suffering. I beg you, become friends to those who suffer. Be friends of the poor, the foreigners, the elderly, and even every sister and brother who suffer. You will meet God Himself. Thank you for your attention. It was a great privilege for me to bring these words to all of us and to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for both your moving story and also your optimism and resilience with which we can hope to inspire the young people that we reach here in Hong Kong and in Asia. This is exactly what we try to do, is to bring a message of hope that out of darkness comes light, and that hopefully one can learn the lessons in such a way that we become more sensitive to suffering, more empathetic, and also more resilient in trying to prevent atrocities before they happen. Can I ask you, what is your response what is the response you get when you talk to young people, when you go to schools and you mentioned you went to Auschwitz with a group of other survivors. What is the response? And you spoke there to 400 people. What is the response you get?
Very surprisingly, that I have not awaited, I got more response than I hoped for, in a good way, understanding. And it is important that the young people know really what happened. I grew up as a gypsy in Germany. It was not easy. We lived in barracks at the time, and there were many other children from other nations, but we gypsies were always the ones that were the bad ones, as we are still in some countries. Some people don't even want to be near us gypsies. but a lot of things have changed. And the change comes with understanding when you meet somebody and you let them part in your life to understand. You invite them like we used to invite, my friends, or then they meet, if their families meet, and their attitude changes when they know you. Because normally gypsies and Romas and like the Indians and Mexicans in America, we are always the outcast. And until people meet you and know you, they feel different, that you also a human being. Just because you are gypsy or you have a different color does not mean that you're out of this world. And the contact to people is the most important. And to talk to people, offer a meeting and invite them so they see that you live like other humans being live. And that's important. And you start with the children and with the elder ones. And this has been one of my greatest, that I speak English. I was raised by an American father because my mom and my father were separated at the time. And then after the war, my mama met an American and he became my father and he raised me. So I grew up in three different lives, a Sinti, a Gypsy, a German, and an America. And it helped me a lot. And we were stationed in El Paso 2 years, my father, my mama, and I in the 60s. And I also met the Mexicans and the Indians there. So my life was very full of learning and deciding and knowing different backgrounds. But no matter what you learn, even in school, what you learn from others and other people, if it's Gypsy, Indians, or what, you always find that our people are always the one that in one way are not liked, hated, or prosecuted. And this is something that we don't understand. Because when you go together in a church or in a city, you look at each other, we are all the same. So why is this hatred still carried on today? It is still carried on and it is growing. And I know, being an American living there, my son and daughter live there. My son is married to an Indian. My daughter is married to a Peruvian. And that's, for me, the biggest gift, because racism doesn't come over for us being Gypsy. And this is what's important. It's not what you are or how you look, it's how you feel inside and what you can give back. Give love and understanding and not hatred and discrimination. That doesn't lead to anything. It even goes as far as war in this world. So I thank you for giving me this opportunity to give these words. And my voice is this is a subject where I get very soft, but sometimes it's better to show your emotions and how you feel, because prosecution will always be with you if you're different, and it is important to show other people how much it hurts if you different in a racial way. And one thing I would like to say for all those people who pretend and go to church, I am Roman Catholic. I don't run to church every Sunday. It's sometimes I do. In America, I do, because my grandsons and my son and my daughter-in-law, because they belong to the church. Here, sometimes I don't feel good going to a German church. You still can feel the racism, except when you go with Sant'Egidio. We are all one. It doesn't matter the color, the age, how you look. And I was very happy and pleased when I was invited to go with the community of Sant'Egidio to Rome, and I got to meet the Pope. That was the biggest gift in my life. And so with that in my heart, I forgive all those racist people who are against us. Sometimes something has to happen for people to wake up and look over and say, this is also a human being, and this is what we need. Be human, be yourself. And thank you for this chance that I could talk to you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. God bless you.